I think this might be a good time. Let's take a look at this weekend's win and you're in race for the Breeders' Cup. It is the Grade 1 Ballerina. It goes as race number 7 on Saturday, approximately 3:42 at Eastern time. And we just had our little head-to-head bet. Talked about how it's fun to make bets amongst friends. Well, we've got some friends who have a wager in this race for a fair amount of jelly beans. Folks might recall this happened just after last year's Kentucky Oaks, when our very own In the Money Players Podcast fellow member, whatever you want to say, Jonathan Kinchin, was perhaps a little bitter about being knocked out of some pick bet by Serengeti Empress. And he wagered with Craig Bernick, who's had Breeders' Cup runners himself in those famous Glen Hill Farm colors, that Serengeti Empress would never win another Grade 1. Well, Saturday could be where the rubber meets the road. JK has dodged many bullets, probably most notably in this race last year, where I think if you change the trips between Serengeti Empress and Kofefi, you probably would have traded the result. That was clearly a Grade 1 winning effort. But my question for you, Matt Bernier, off these last 2 races, is this the same Serengeti Empress? Is this the day where Craig Bernick is finally going to make good on his promise and stuff JK in a locker?
Well, so I think you can split the 2 questions up. Is she the same horse as she was last year? I have no reason to believe that she's not. When you take a look and see the way that she ran in the Azaria, I understand it was a sloppy sealed track, but she just put the boots to that field, and I get it. Maybe the field was a little bit suspect. Then she steps back into the deep end of the pool with the Apple Blossom and the Fleur de Lis, where she took on Midnight Bisou. The difference is, in the Apple Blossom, I felt like, well, it was a bit of a pace meltdown with the exception of Ollie's Candy, but also the tactics. The minute they didn't go on for the lead, she wasn't going to win, plain and simple. At this point in her career, I think it's pretty safe to say that she's a need-the-lead type. And that's why I know many people were critical of the ride in the Fleur de Lis from Joe Talamo. I had no problem with it. She has gone that fast in the past. And guess what? It just didn't work. I'm not going to sit there and criticize. We've talked about it time and time again. You have a speed horse, use your best asset. And I get it. Maybe it was a little bit on the swift side, but to my point, she's gone that fast in the past and continued on. So I'm not going to really hold that one against her too much. I have always preferred the idea of sort of a one-turn configuration, whether it's a one-turn mile or 7/8 of a mile. The problem for me with a situation like this, I think she couldn't help but gain some fitness out of that most recent run, just going as fast as she did. I like the turn back, but I think she's going to have company up front again, and it just makes me wonder. She may be the best of the speed, but boy, she's going to have to work so hard to put the other speeds away. And then you're going to have horses like Bellafina, like Come Dancing, even a horse like Pink Sands, who they're going to be the ones to potentially take advantage of a pace stool. I don't think she's going to win in a spot like this. I respect her. I think, to me, as she gets older, I actually like her more and more. And again, I get it. I know what her game is. She's a one-way speed type. Breaking from the rail, man, she's going to have a lot of work to do on Saturday afternoon.
It sounds like you think JK might get to hold on to his jelly beans. I'll tell you this, it's one of those races where that break always so important. But here, I think you'll know maybe at the quarter how this one's going to go. And he's either going to be white knuckling or exhaling very deeply, depending on what kind of pressure comes in, especially I think cookie dough right to the outside. That is certainly an interesting aspect of the draw. Let's talk about Come Dancing for a minute. This is one who obviously did some really great work, especially up here last summer in this very race. Did not run her race in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Had the failed Oaklawn experiment. Maybe last time at Belmont in the Vagrancy showed she's heading back in the right direction and now comes back to her favorite track. I did not end up picking her in here, but she's one that I would not be surprised to see step back up and get me in this spot. What are your general thoughts on this talented 6-year-old mare? Is she heading back in the right direction, or are her best days behind her?
I've loved her for a long time. I just think she's a proper racehorse. She goes out there, and maybe she doesn't have, the sexiest pedigree, but boy, she's a hard trier. She's blue collar type. And the big thing for me last year, toward the end of the year anyway, that Gallant Bloom made me really concerned because she was lugging in terribly in that race. And I said, I wonder if all of a sudden we're starting to go off form. And we've seen it in the past. Certain horses, they have a nice stretch of races where they're at their absolute best. And then, it's just very difficult to maintain that kind of form. So I wanted no part of her in the Breeders' Cup. She didn't pick her feet up at odds of 2-1. Again, a very difficult position with Covfefe and Bellafina in there. The Apple Blossom, to me, is an entire line through. I mean, she's just not a two-turn horse. She's always been a one-turn type. They took a chance. The Vagrancy, I'm kind of leaning toward the narrative that you were trying to perhaps spin. And that, you know what? I get it. From a number standpoint, it looks very slow. Looks like she still hasn't come back to the form that she showed as a 5-year-old. I think it was a nice starting off point, getting her back. This is clearly the goal here. You want to run in the biggest races. She's already a Grade 1 winner. I'm not saying that they don't want to win a race like the Vagrancy, but let's shake the rust off. Let's have her ready to go. Second start back. She gets up to Saratoga. She's 2 for 3 over the main track up there at the Spa. To me, she's the one that could work out the perfect trip in here, where if you do get those other horses that line up early, Bellafina, we'll talk about her in a moment. I'll just give you the heads up. I just don't trust her at all. Come Dancing, I feel like she's a little bit more trustworthy. I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say she needed that last race, and I think she trips out in here. She would be my pick in here.
I get it. And I think Bellafina and tactics on Bellafina, for me, will determine how much I'm down with the plan that you're describing, because I feel like tactically, if Bellafina is to go hammer and tongs or really stay glued to the other speed, this really could set up for a Come Dancing. And that, as I design my pick bets, is a scenario that I definitely need to account for. Bellafina, you mentioned a little bit of potential skepticism there, shortly due to the fact that this one is 12 for 12 in the exacta in races in California and 0 for 4 races in the exacta with only 1/3 to boot in races outside of her home base. I was thinking she was going to get the right kind of trip. She was going to let the other speeds go and just get such a perfect trip. And I was thinking that the Connections confidence really meant something here. And I made her a fairly strong bet at something on the order of 2-1 or higher. But can you just not get over the fact that she hasn't traveled?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest part for me. And I go back to the run 2 starts back. That was her most recent victory, the Desert Stormer. I mean, it was an absolute dream trip, and she was running against inferior company. I'm not arguing that her best is or isn't good enough to win in a spot like this. I think it's pretty clear that when she really shows up with her run, she can beat any of these horses. And I think you and I may actually look at the trip very similarly, where I don't think she's actually involved in the pace early on. I just wonder if there's a situation where perhaps she gets boxed in, where maybe her and Come Dancing are kind of in similar positions off the pace, but Come Dancing is the one that's out in the clear. Bellafina is inside, in behind horses, waiting for a seam. If Come Dancing can get the jump on Bellafina, and let's also keep in mind, Bellafina has not been the best gate horse in the world. If she wins, I will tip my cap and say, good on you. I can't help but think people are still going back to the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint last year, where, kind of by default, when she got pinched back, it actually worked to her advantage because they went so fast early on. And to your point, she loves Southern California. She loves Santa Anita. So there's a part of me that looks at it and says, until she proves to me away from home that she can do it, I'm going to side against her at a short price. But I can understand the logic behind picking her, especially with the trip that you've kind of painted for her.
Let's talk about some of the others in here. Latrusca certainly has some claims. Speedy, improving, 4-year-old. At the end of the day, I just thought Bellafina was going to get a much better trip, and she was more of a pace factor, but I wouldn't argue with anybody who said, given this one's incredible body of work, really, granted, against lesser, but still, 9 for 11 lifetime is 9 for 11 lifetime. Did you give this Speedy sort any count?
Honestly, the biggest piece for me was she is a factor in the way this race is going to be played, because I think they have to go. I don't think there's any choice. I think she's going to show big speed. If you're a fan of hers, it's probably a bit of a feather in her cap. I understand it was doing 2 totally different things, but Nona Madeline came right back and won next out. I believe that was the Summer Colony. So if you want to look at that and say that's a positive, I won't argue. But to the bigger point, I think she's part of the speed early on. I think she's one that'll make life miserable for Serengeti Empress. I don't think she factors as far as the ultimate, sort of results are concerned, but I do think she could potentially compromise a horse like Serengeti.
the rest of the field, I mean, Cookie Dough we talked about as a pace factor. Victim of Love, last time was the time. And I feel like even a repeat of that last pace situation-wise, it still might not get it done. And then we have Pink Sands for Shug McGahee, who I feel like is maybe an interesting come running, get a piece type. And I could spin you a yarn about how things would go for her to get to the winner's circle. But for me, I'd probably just be limiting to underneath. How did you see the longer prices in this year's Ballerina?
Yeah, to your point with Cookie Dough, I agree. I think she's involved early on. I think she's another bit of an issue for a horse like Serengeti Empress. Victim of Love, nice horse, defeated Come Dancing in that most recent run. I suppose she stands ground to take that step forward, second off the bench as well. And if she does, look, she's a relatively early 4-year-old. I mean, I know she's gone out 15 times, but this is only one of her first starts here against much better horses. I thought it was a vote of confidence to send her up to New York. She's got reasons to, if you're trying to, get creative. And to your point with Pink Sands, I think she's best used underneath. I could see her rounding out a trifecta. If you're playing a superfecta, one that I would at least consider, simply because she has that running style where she's just going to get outrun early on. And I mean, if things heat up like crazy, sure, she could come and take all the marbles, but I don't think she has the right necessarily running style to win. I think she can get a piece. And B, I don't think she's all that fast, if we're being honest. I think some of her best races, they're still a notch or two below some of the best that everybody else can bring.
It's hard to argue with that. And I will say that sometimes these extreme pace scenarios, and we'll talk about this when we get to the test, I do think are the kind of thing that can make a quote unquote slower horse win. But I'm not seeing it here. Funny enough, it is a Shug McGahee runner in that same role I do want to talk about when we get to the test, but we'll get there momentarily. We'll button up this conversation about the Ballerina, this win and you're in race for the Breeders' Cup.